June 2, 1953. Westminster Abbey, London, England. Outside, 1 million people line the streets of London in driving rain. They have waited all night. Some have waited 3 days. They are wrapped in blankets, huddled under newspaper, soaked through, and they will not move. Because today, for the first time in 327 years, a coronation will be broadcast on television. For the first time in history, the entire world will watch a monarch be crowned. Inside the Abbey, 8,000 guests are seated, heads of state, prime ministers, maharajas, presidents, generals, the elite of every nation that Britain has ever touched. And there, in the front row, in his ceremonial uniform, wearing the Order of the Garter, sits an old man. He is 78 years old. He is the most famous person alive. He survived 2 wars, 2 prison camps, 2 plane crashes, 2 strokes, 2 heart attacks, and 2 lost elections. He led 45 million people through the darkest chapter in the history of Western civilization and brought them out the other side. He has written more books than most people read in a lifetime. He has painted over 500 canvases. He has laid bricks, bred butterflies, and consumed, by personal estimate, enough champagne to fill a swimming pool. His name is Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. And as he watches the 27-year-old woman in white walk toward the altar, the woman he will serve as Prime Minister, the woman he has known since she was 2 years old, his eyes fill with tears. 3 weeks from now, a secret that will not be fully told for decades will happen. Churchill will suffer a stroke so severe that his own cabinet will debate whether he is dying. He will hide it from the world. He will hide it from Parliament. He will hide it, even for a time, from his Queen. And the young woman being crowned today, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, will navigate the most treacherous political waters of the 20th century, with this weeping old warrior as her guide, her mentor, and perhaps the most extraordinary human being she will ever know. Between them, 50 years of age difference, 50 years of shared British history, and a bond that neither of them, for all their vast power, was ever quite able to put into words. This is the story of Queen Elizabeth and Winston Churchill, the Crown, and the Lion, 2 people who together define what Britain was, what it became, and what it was trying to be. Chapter 1. The Lion is born Winston Churchill, 1874–1900, November 30, 1874. Blenheim Palace, Woodstock, Oxfordshire, one of the greatest houses in England. 187 rooms, 2,000 acres. Built by the Duke of Marlborough, military hero, ancestor of the family that has occupied this palace for 2 centuries. In a small ground floor bedroom, because there is no time to reach a proper suite, a woman named Jenny Jerome Churchill, American-born socialite and wife of Lord Randolph Churchill, gives birth 7 weeks early. The baby is small, unexpected, and loud. His name is Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. He is, from the first moment, inconvenient. His father is Lord Randolph Churchill, brilliant, erratic, ambitious, one of the most dazzling political figures of the Victorian age. His mother is Jenny Jerome, daughter of a New York financier, one of the most beautiful and celebrated women in London society. Both of them have almost no time for their son. Churchill will later write, with the kind of understated devastation that only the truly neglected learn to deploy, that his greatest wish as a child was for his father to speak to him. Not teach him, not advise him, simply speak to him, as one human being to another. It almost never happens. Churchill grows up largely in the care of his nanny, Mrs. Elizabeth Everest Womany, as he calls her. She is the warmest constant presence of his childhood. When she dies in 1895, Churchill sits at her bedside and weeps. He keeps her photograph at his bedside for the rest of his life. At Harrow School, one of England's great elite boarding schools, Churchill is, by his own cheerful admission, close to the bottom of his class. He fails his entrance examination to the Royal Military College at Sandhurst twice. He passes on the third attempt, but only by applying to the cavalry, which requires a lower academic standard than the infantry. His father, Lord Randolph, writes him a letter in response that is one of the cruelest documents in the history of English parenting. I am certain that if you cannot prevent yourself from leading the idle, useless, unprofitable life you have had during your school days, you will become a mere social wastrel. One of the hundreds of the public school failures, Lord Randolph Churchill dies in January 1895, likely from a neurological disease. He is 45 years old. He never sees what his son becomes. Winston Churchill is 20 years old, standing at his father's grave, making a silent promise that he will accomplish everything his father predicted he would not. Cuba, India, Sudan, South Africa. The young Churchill, commissioned into the cavalry, is not content to sit at regimental dinners and wait for his career to find him. He goes looking for wars. In Cuba in 1895, he attaches himself to the Spanish army as a correspondent and observer, and comes under fire for the first time on his 21st birthday. He notes with satisfaction that he does not flinch. In India in 1897, he fights on the northwest frontier and simultaneously writes his first book. In Sudan in 1898, he rides in the last great cavalry charge in British military history at the Battle of Omdurman. The dervishes are mowed down by machine guns. Churchill charges through them on horseback, firing his Mauser pistol. He is 23 years old. He writes a book about it that becomes a bestseller and causes a minor political scandal. And then South Africa, 1899, the Boer War. Churchill travels to South Africa as a war correspondent for the Morning Post. On November 15, 1899, the armored train carrying Churchill is ambushed by Boer forces. Churchill helps organize the defense, helps clear the track, ensures the engine escapes and is captured. He is held in a prisoner of war camp in Pretoria. He escapes alone over a wall into the African night with no map, no food, and no contacts. He travels 300 miles through hostile territory, hidden in a coal mine by a sympathetic English mine manager, riding in a wool truck across the border into Portuguese Mozambique. He walks into the British consulate in Lourenço Marques, filthy, exhausted, and grinning. He is immediately famous across the entire British Empire. He is 25 years old. In 1900, Winston Churchill is elected to Parliament as the Conservative MP for Oldham. His career in politics, which will span 64 years, 6 sovereigns, and 2 world wars, has begun. Chapter 2. The Wilderness Years, Brilliance, Disaster, and Redemption. 1900–1940. Churchill's early political career is one of the most bewildering in British history. A succession of brilliant achievements, catastrophic failures, and remarkable recoveries that together constitute a 40-year crucible for the man who will ultimately save Western civilization. He defects from the Conservative Party to the Liberals in 1904. He holds ministerial office under Prime Minister Asquith, becoming President of the Board of Trade, then Home Secretary, then First Lord of the Admiralty, the political head of the Royal Navy. He is 37 years old and widely considered one of the most capable ministers in the British government. Then Gallipoli, 1915. Churchill conceives and champions what he believes is a war-winning strategy, a naval attack through the Dardanelles Strait, forcing a passage to Constantinople, knocking the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and opening a supply route to Russia, breaking the deadlock on the Western Front. The campaign is catastrophic. The naval attack fails. An amphibious landing at Gallipoli becomes one of the bloodiest disasters of the war, 56,000 Allied soldiers die. Churchill is blamed unfairly. Historians now largely agree, since he was overruled on crucial tactical decisions, but the blame sticks. He resigns from the cabinet. He goes to France as a battalion commander on the Western Front. He is in the trenches, literally, doing penance in mud and shellfire for a strategic failure that was only partially his fault. He returns to politics. He holds office again under Lloyd George. He defects back to the Conservatives. He is Chancellor of the Exchequer from 1924 to 1929 and makes one of the great economic errors of the 20th century, returning Britain to the gold standard at a pre-war rate that devastates British exports and contributes directly to mass unemployment. The Wilderness Years, 1929–1939. Churchill loses office when the Conservatives fall in 1929. He will spend the next 10 years in political exile, still a member of Parliament, still writing, still painting, still building walls and breeding pigs at his beloved home of Chartwell in Kent, but systematically excluded from government. He is a difficult man. He is wrong about India opposing self-government. He is embarrassingly wrong about the abdication crisis, defending King Edward VII's right to marry Wallis Simpson when almost all political opinion has turned against the king. He drinks too much. He is expensive to disagree with. He is expensive to agree with. But on one thing, through all these years of exile and error and embarrassment, Winston Churchill is absolutely, precisely, prophetically right. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi threat. From 1933, when Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany, Churchill stands alone in the British Parliament warning, insisting, demanding that Hitler is not a rational actor who can be appeased, that he is an expansionist dictator who will not stop until he is stopped by force, that Britain must rearm, immediately, urgently, before it is too late. He is ignored, he is mocked, he is patronized. The architects of appeasement, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax, negotiate with Hitler. They give him the Rhineland. They give him Austria. They give him the Sudetenland. Each concession is accompanied by the assurance that Hitler is now satisfied. Churchill watches each concession with the controlled fury of a man who knows exactly what comes next. September 1, 1939. Germany invades Poland. 2 days later, Britain declares war. Chamberlain, devastated, humiliated, is forced to bring Churchill back into the government as First Lord of the Admiralty. The signal goes out to the Royal Navy. Winston is back, and on May 10, 1940, the same day that Germany launches its devastating invasion of France and the Low Countries, Neville Chamberlain resigns. Winston Churchill, 65 years old, dismissed, mocked, exiled from power for a decade, walks into 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He will later write, "I felt as if I was walking with destiny, and that all my past life had been but a preparation for this hour and for this trial." Chapter 3. The Crown is born, Princess Elizabeth, 1926–1945, April 21, 1926. 17 Bruton Street, Mayfair, London. 20 miles and 50 years from Blenheim Palace, in a Mayfair townhouse belonging to the Earl and Countess of Strathmore, a baby girl is born by caesarean section to the Duke and Duchess of York. Her name is Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. She is the first child of Prince Albert, a shy, conscientious man who has spent his life in the shadow of his charismatic elder brother Edward, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, a Scottish aristocrat of charm, warmth, and iron determination, who will eventually become the most beloved woman in the British Empire. Elizabeth's birth is third in line to the throne, behind her father Albert and her uncle Edward, the Prince of Wales. Nobody, not her parents, not the royal family, not the government, expects her ever to be queen. The plan is simple. Edward will eventually marry, have children, and the succession is settled. The plan will not survive contact with Wallis Simpson. Baby Elizabeth, Lilibet, as she calls herself, unable at first to manage the full version of her name, grows up in a comfortable, close-knit royal family that is unusually normal by the standards of European monarchy. Her father teaches her chess. Her mother reads to her every night. Her sister Margaret, 4 years younger, is her constant companion and comic foil. She grows up at 145 Piccadilly, a London townhouse, decidedly not palatial, and later at Royal Lodge, Windsor, surrounded by dogs, corgis, inevitably horses, and the rituals of upper-class English country life. She is a serious child, methodical, conscientious. Even at 5 years old, her governess Marion Crawford, Crawfie, notes that she lines up her shoes with military precision before bed and insists on saying goodnight to her horses before sleeping. December 1936, the abdication crisis. Elizabeth is 10 years old when the world of the British monarchy collapses and rebuilds itself over the course of 6 days. Her uncle Edward VII, the Golden Prince, the charming bachelor king, the man on whom the whole succession depends, announces that he intends to marry Wallis Simpson. Mrs. Simpson is American, twice divorced, and wholly unacceptable to the Church of England, the British government, and the Dominions as Queen. The Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, makes it clear the king cannot marry Mrs. Simpson and remain king. Edward VII chooses Mrs. Simpson. On December 11, 1936, King Edward VII abdicates. In a radio broadcast heard around the world, he says the famous words, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." His brother Albert, who did not want the throne, who has a debilitating stammer, who has spent his life consciously not preparing for sovereignty, becomes King George VI. And Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, 10 years old, becomes heir presumptive to the throne of the British Empire. The world changes for her that December. Everything changes. The lessons become more serious. The schedule becomes more structured. The weight of what is coming settles onto her 10-year-old shoulders with the quiet inevitability of inheritance. She accepts it. Completely, without protest, without drama. Because this is what she will do for the next 86 years. Accept what is required of her and do it without complaint, without hesitation, and without ever once publicly wondering whether it is what she would have chosen for herself. 1939–1945, the Second World War. Princess Elizabeth is 13 years old when the war begins. She is evacuated with her sister Margaret, first to Balmoral, then to Windsor Castle, where they spend most of the war years. Her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, make the decision that has defined the royal family's relationship with the British public ever since. They stay in London. They will not leave. When Buckingham Palace is bombed by the Luftwaffe 9 times, Queen Elizabeth says one of the most famous sentences of the war, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." In 1940, the 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth makes her first radio broadcast to the children of Britain and the Commonwealth who have been evacuated from their homes. Her voice is steady, formal, unmistakably royal. And at the end, she turns to her sister and says, "Live on air. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen, and we are also trying to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. We know, every one of us, that in the end all will be well." In 1945, she joins the Auxiliary Territorial Service, training as a driver and mechanic. She changes spark plugs, changes tires, drives military ambulances through Windsor in the fog. She is the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces. She is 18 years old. She has known since she was 10 that she will one day be queen, and she has spent every year since making herself ready. Chapter 4. First meeting, Balmoral, 1928. Let us pause here. Let us go back. Because the story of Churchill and Elizabeth does not begin with the coronation. It does not begin with the king's death. It does not even begin with the war. It begins in September 1928. At Balmoral Castle, the royal family's Highland retreat in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. Churchill is 53 years old. He is Chancellor of the Exchequer, one of the four most powerful men in the British government. He has been invited to Balmoral to shoot and to discuss matters of state with King George V. In the nursery of Balmoral, there is a 2-year-old girl, curly red hair, serious blue eyes, an expression of concentrated authority that seems entirely wrong on a face that small. Churchill watches her. She watches him back. He writes to his wife Clementine the same evening. There is no one here at all except the family, the household, and the little Princess Elizabeth. The latter is a character. She has an air of authority and reflectiveness astonishing in an infant. He is right, as he will so often be, infuriatingly and brilliantly right. The 2-year-old girl with the air of authority is watching the 53-year-old politician with the interest of someone who is already, without knowing it, measuring the world. They will not properly occupy the same political stage for another 24 years, but some recognition, some foreshadowing passes between them in that Scottish nursery. The crown has met the lion for the first time. Chapter 5. The finest hour, Churchill and the war, 1940–1945, May 13, 1940. The House of Commons. Churchill has been Prime Minister for 3 days. Germany has broken through the French lines at Sedan. The entire Allied defensive strategy is collapsing. The British Expeditionary Force is being pushed toward the sea. Churchill rises in the House of Commons. The chamber is packed and silent. He says, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." 4 words: blood, toil, tears, sweat. There is no promise of victory, no assurance that it will be all right, no comfortable illusion, only the naked truth and the demand that the truth be faced. May 26, June 4, 1940. Dunkirk. 338,226 British and Allied soldiers are evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk by a flotilla of 850 vessels, military ships, civilian ferries, fishing boats, pleasure craft. It is militarily a defeat. It is strategically a miracle. Churchill speaks again. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." There is something that Churchill does in these speeches that no politician before or since has quite replicated. He does not comfort people. He does not soften the truth. He tells them exactly how bad things are, and then tells them that this will not stop them. He treats his listeners as adults, as people capable of bearing terrible knowledge and acting on it anyway. The British public, who have been waiting for a leader who will tell them the truth, respond with something close to collective love. June 18, 1940. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say. This was their finest hour. The Battle of Britain, July to October 1940. The Luftwaffe attempts to destroy the Royal Air Force and clear the way for a German invasion. Fighter Command, with 1,500 pilots against Goering's 3,000, fights it off. Churchill visits the operations room of No. 11 Group RAF during the most critical day of the battle. He watches in silence as every available fighter is scrambled, every single one. There is nothing in reserve. If the Germans send another wave, there is nothing left to stop them. He turns to his aide and says, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. North Africa, El Alamein, Sicily, Italy, D-Day, the liberation of Europe." Churchill is present at every major strategic decision of the war, arguing, cajoling, sometimes overruled, sometimes brilliantly right, sometimes dangerously wrong. He meets Roosevelt at Placentia Bay in 1941, establishing the Atlantic Charter, the foundation of the post-war international order. He meets Stalin in Moscow in 1942. He flies from conference to conference, sleeps in planes and trains and military bunkers, works 18-hour days at 68 years old. He is in London on May 8, 1945, VE Day. He appears on the balcony of the Ministry of Health to address the celebrating crowds below. The crowd roars. Churchill weeps. He has done what his whole life was preparation for. And then, July 1945. With the war in Europe won but the war in the Pacific still ongoing, with the peace settlement not yet made, with the world still trembling, Churchill calls a general election. And loses. The British public, exhausted and grateful, votes for the Labour Party and Clement Attlee. They love Churchill, they worship Churchill, and they vote him out. Churchill is destroyed. He cannot understand it. He sits at Chartwell, painting, writing his war memoirs, and waiting. He does not wait in obscurity. In March 1946, at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, with President Truman on the platform beside him, Churchill delivers one of the most consequential speeches of the 20th century. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent. The Iron Curtain speech. It names the Cold War before most people know they are in one. It defines the divide that will shape the next 45 years of world history. Churchill is out of power. But he has never stopped being the most important voice in the world. Chapter 6. The Queen is Made, Elizabeth, 1947–1952, November 20, 1947. Westminster Abbey. Princess Elizabeth, 21 years old, marries Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, a handsome, brilliant, sometimes abrasive naval officer who is her third cousin. She has been in love with him since she was 13 years old, when he was a cadet at the Dartmouth Naval College, and she watched him vault a tennis net. The public wedding is a moment of extraordinary national joy in a Britain that is still rationing food. Thousands of well-wishers send their own clothing ration coupons to the palace so that the princess can have a more elaborate dress. The palace, touched, returns them all. The dress, designed by Norman Hartnell, embroidered with 10,000 seed pearls, is magnificent anyway. On her 21st birthday, in a radio broadcast from Cape Town, South Africa, Princess Elizabeth had made a declaration that is, in its quiet, absolute commitment, one of the most remarkable public promises ever made. "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." She is 21 years old. She means every word. She will prove it for 75 years. February 6, 1952, Sagana Lodge, Kenya. The princess, now 25 with 2 children, Charles and Anne, is partway up a fig tree in Kenya, watching wildlife at a watering hole below when her father dies. King George VI, who has been ill for years, who had a lung removed, who smoked until his body gave out, dies in his sleep at Sandringham at the age of 56. His daughter, 25 years old and up a tree in Africa, becomes queen. She comes down from the tree. She is informed. She is pale and still. She sits for a moment in silence. And then she asks for pen and paper and begins writing the letters of condolence to her mother, to her staff, to the people who have served her father, that a queen must write. She is in shock. And she does not stop. Philip, who has to tell her, later describes the moment as one of the hardest things he has ever done. He takes her for a walk in the garden and tells her. She receives the news in silence. She asks him only, "What happens now? What happens now?" Not "How could this happen?" Not "I am not ready." Not "I need time." What happens now? That is Elizabeth. That is the Queen. Chapter 7. The Crown, MEATS, The Lion, 1952–1955, February 1952. 10 Downing Street. Winston Churchill, 77 years old, returned to power as Prime Minister since October 1951, receives the news of King George VI's death. He weeps. He and the King had worked together through 6 years of war, through crisis and exhaustion, and shared terror and shared triumph. They had been genuinely close. His private secretary, John Colville, knowing Churchill's uncertainty about the young new queen, gently reassures him. "You will find her charming, attractive, intelligent, and immensely conscientious." Churchill shakes his head, tears still wet on his face. "I hardly know her, and she is only a child." Colville knew better. He had served as Princess Elizabeth's private secretary from 1947 to 1949. Within weeks, Churchill's doubts are completely, permanently dissolved. He meets the new queen. He attends his first Tuesday audience, the weekly private meeting between Prime Minister and monarch at which no notes are taken, no civil servants are present, and no record is kept. The most confidential conversation in British government. He walks out of the first audience dazzled. He tells Colville, "She is remarkable." Churchill's daughter Mary later says the Queen had quickly captivated him, and the word Colville uses privately is more surprising than that. He says Churchill was madly in love with the Queen, not romantically. The distinction is important to make. The feeling is more complex. A man 50 years older, looking at a young woman who embodies everything he has devoted his life to defending: duty, continuity, dignity, the nation. A man who has spent his life in service to the crown falling, at the end of his life, completely under the spell of the crown itself, incarnated in this particular young woman with her blue eyes and her impeccable composure. He begins to look forward to Tuesday afternoons more than anything else in his week. His daughter notes that he often cancels other engagements on Tuesday, but never the audience. The Queen, for her part, finds in Churchill something irreplaceable, not just knowledge and experience, but a kind of historical depth that no other living person can offer. He has been there, not just in Parliament, not just in government, but in the actual, physical, bloody making of history. He has held rifles and paintbrushes and champagne glasses and the hands of dying men. He carries the entire arc of British history in his memory like a living library. Colville writes that she had more fun with Churchill than with any of his successors. Their conversations, for all their gravity, are punctuated with peals of laughter. June 2, 1953. The coronation. Churchill sits in Westminster Abbey in his uniform, wearing the garter he has received from the Queen's own hands. He watches her crowned. He weeps again. He weeps more than usual in these final years, as if the emotional armor that sustained him through the worst of the war has finally, at 78, been partially dismantled. The coronation is the first major British state ceremony to be televised. 27 million people in Britain watch it on television. 11 million more than there are television sets in the country, because neighbors gather around each other's sets. The world watches Britain crown its young queen. 3 weeks later, a secret. On June 23, 1953, at a dinner at 10 Downing Street, Winston Churchill suffers a massive stroke. His speech slurs. His left side weakens. He finishes the dinner through will alone, refusing to let his guests see what is happening to him. By morning, it is clear he may be dying. Lord Moran, his physician, assesses the damage. Churchill's left side is partially paralyzed. His speech is impaired. He cannot walk properly, and yet Churchill refuses to resign. He refuses to tell Parliament. He refuses to tell the press. The most extraordinary cover-up in the history of British political life begins. For 2 months, Winston Churchill governs the United Kingdom from his bedroom at Chartwell, unable to walk without assistance, barely able to speak clearly, while his cabinet and his private secretary spin an elaborate web of absence and explanation that keeps the truth from the public, from Parliament, and for a time, from the Queen herself. When the Queen is finally fully informed of the severity of the stroke, her response, characteristically, is not anger at having been kept in the dark. It is concern for the man. She writes him a personal letter of warmth and support. Slowly, over months, Churchill recovers. Partially, he is never again what he was. But he is still Churchill, still the most formidable mind and the most formidable will in any room he enters. April 24, 1953. The Queen invests Churchill personally with the Order of the Garter, Britain's highest order of chivalry, in the gift of the sovereign alone, not the Prime Minister. It is a personal gift from her to him for a lifetime of service. 1954. The Queen returns from a 6-month Commonwealth tour of Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific. It is the first time a reigning British monarch has visited Australia. The receptions are overwhelming, millions of people turning out in the heat to see the young woman who has flown from the other side of the world to visit them. Churchill, who has been watching the tour from London, increasingly frail, increasingly aware that his time is ending, insists on sailing down the Thames on the royal yacht to meet the Queen as she returns up the river. He stands on deck as the 2 ships pass, old man and young Queen, the river between them. He will later describe the Thames as a silver thread running through the history of England. April 5, 1955. Churchill resigns as Prime Minister. He is 80 years old. It is, by any measure, the right moment, long overdue, in fact, given his health, but the leaving is brutal. On his last day as Prime Minister, he writes about his 3 years as the Queen's first constitutional advisor, his attempts to keep her up to date with the grave and complex problems of the age, and his admiration for her wise and lively approach to the role of sovereign, which she understood by instinct. The Queen writes back to him, handwritten, personal, not typed by a secretary, not drafted by a courtier, her own words. She tells him that no future Prime Minister will ever occupy the place that he has, that he is her first Prime Minister, who provided such wise guidance during the early years of my reign. She says both she and Prince Philip owe him more than she can properly express. Churchill keeps the letter for the rest of his life. Chapter 8. The Queen alone navigating the post-Churchill world. 1955-1970. After Churchill, everything is different. Not worse exactly, but different. Smaller in a sense. His 13 successors are capable men and women. Some of them are remarkable, but none of them carry history in their person the way Churchill did. None of them have been at Omdurman and Gallipoli, and the trenches, and the cabinet war rooms in Yalta. None of them make the Queen laugh until she wipes her eyes. The crises of her reign come regardless. The Suez Crisis, 1956. Prime Minister Anthony Eden, Churchill's chosen successor. The man who has waited most of his career for Churchill to step aside, launches a secret military operation to retake the Suez Canal from Egypt's nationalist President Nasser, who has nationalized it. Eden does not tell the United States. He does not consult the Commonwealth. He lies to Parliament about the secret agreement with France and Israel that triggers the military action. When America, under Eisenhower, refuses to support Britain and threatens to destroy the pound by selling off U.S. holdings of British currency, Eden is finished. The Queen is constitutionally unable to stop Eden, but she watches the humiliation of Britain on the world stage with the contained, dignified dismay that is her permanent expression in public. After Suez, Britain knows, finally, completely, that it is no longer a superpower. The empire that the young princess had pledged her life to serving is ending. The winds of change, decolonization. Through the late 1950s and 1960s, the British Empire dismantles itself, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently. Ghana in 1957, Nigeria in 1960, Tanganyika in 1961, Uganda in 1962, Kenya in 1963, Zambia in 1964. Across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, the Union Jack comes down and new flags go up. Elizabeth watches. She hosts independence ceremonies. She greets the new leaders of formerly British territories. She transforms what could have been a catastrophic unraveling into something more extraordinary. The Commonwealth of Nations, a voluntary association of 54 countries, most of them former British territories, bound by shared history and values rather than by force. It is, arguably, the most sophisticated piece of political alchemy of the 20th century, converting the guilt and complexity of empire into something that looks, from a certain angle, like friendship. Harold Macmillan, Alec Douglas Home, Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, Harold Wilson again. The audiences continue, every Tuesday, no notes, no record. The most private conversations in British public life. Harold Wilson, Labour Prime Minister twice in the 1960s and 70s, will later say that his weekly audiences with the Queen were the only meetings in his political life at which he spoke completely, freely, knowing that nothing he said would ever be repeated or used against him. That perfect confidentiality, the knowledge that the sovereign is constitutionally incapable of betraying a prime minister's confidence, creates a space that no other institution in British political life can replicate. The Queen never discusses what is said in these audiences. Not once in 70 years does she let slip the content of a single conversation with any of her 15 prime ministers. This extraordinary, absolute discretion is not just constitutional propriety. It is a choice, made again and again daily for 7 decades, to put the role above the self. To be the Queen and not Elizabeth. Chapter 9. The Lion Fades, Churchill's Final Years, 1955–1965. After resigning as Prime Minister in 1955, Winston Churchill remains a Member of Parliament, representing Woodford until 1964. He is 89 years old when he finally stands down. His last decade is a long, slow diminishment. The man who had been boundless energy and volcanic opinion gradually becomes quieter, stiller. He paints. He sits at Chartwell in the garden he loves. He watches the garden which he largely built himself, the walls, the fish ponds, the rose beds, the kitchen garden, with the contentment of a man who has done everything he was put on earth to do. He is occasionally glimpsed at public events, the great face, the cigar, the V sign, and the response from crowds is always the same. People stop, people stare. People wave with an emotion that is hard to name. It is something between love and awe and grief, the grief of watching something irreplaceable fade. He suffers a further stroke in 1958, and another, smaller, in 1963. January 1965. He suffers a catastrophic stroke on January 12th. He lingers for 9 days, unconscious, barely breathing, in his London home at Hyde Park Gate. The Queen breaks with royal protocol. She personally visits Churchill at his home, an extraordinary gesture since it is customary for subjects to come to the monarch, not the other way around. She sits with him. She holds his hand. He dies at 9:15 a.m. on Sunday, January 24, 1965. He is 90 years old. The Queen orders a state funeral. only the second non-royal to receive this honor since the Duke of Wellington in 1852. Prime Minister William Gladstone had received one in 1898, making Churchill the first non-royal in the modern era. The gun carriage carrying Churchill's coffin passes through the streets of London. 1 million people line the route. The roads are silent except for the sound of the gun carriage wheels, the military band, and quietly the weeping of strangers. At Tower Bridge, as the coffin passes by river, the cranes of the London docklands, those great industrial cranes that the working men of the docks operate, lower their jibs in salute. It is an improvised, unrehearsed, spontaneous gesture of respect from the workers of the East End, the people of blitz-damaged London, to the man who told them they could bear it. The cranes bow. Britain weeps. The Queen, watching from a window, does not cry in public. She rarely does, but people who are with her say she is very still and very quiet. Chapter 10. The Queen continues. Thatcher, Diana, and the modern world. The Queen's reign continues for another 57 years after Churchill's death. Margaret Thatcher, 1979–1990. The relationship between Elizabeth and Thatcher is one of the most fascinating and least understood in modern British political history. Both are women who have achieved positions of extraordinary power in a world built for men. Both are disciplined, dutiful, and formidable. And by multiple accounts, they do not particularly like each other. The Queen, whose political neutrality is absolute and whose personal politics are genuinely unknown, is reported by senior courtiers to be uncomfortable with Thatcher's divisive style. Her confrontational tone, her willingness to deepen social divisions in the name of economic reform. Thatcher, who has fought every inch of her way to the top against enormous resistance, is reported to be overawed by the Queen in audiences, reverting to deference in a way she does not with anyone else. The Falklands War, 1982, creates one of the most poignant moments of Elizabeth's reign. Her son Prince Andrew is serving as a helicopter pilot in the South Atlantic. The Queen does not request that he be reassigned to a safer position. She does not ask for special treatment for her son. She lets him serve, and she waits. Like every other mother in Britain whose son is in the South Atlantic, Prince Andrew returns safely. The Falklands are retaken. Thatcher's political standing is transformed. The Commonwealth in South Africa. Through the 1980s, the greatest point of tension in the Commonwealth is South Africa and apartheid. The Queen, as head of the Commonwealth, presides over repeated Commonwealth summits at which leaders of African and Caribbean nations demand that Britain apply sanctions against South Africa. Thatcher refuses sanctions. Most Commonwealth members support sanctions. The Queen, who constitutionally cannot contradict her Prime Minister, but who is genuinely committed to the Commonwealth as an institution, navigates this tension with extraordinary care. In 1986, a senior palace aide allows it to be reported that the Queen is uncomfortable with Thatcher's South Africa policy. The leak, unprecedented, causes a constitutional furore. The Queen never confirms or denies it. She never discusses it. She continues doing what she always does, fulfilling her constitutional role and saying nothing. Diana, the crisis of 1997. August 31, 1997. Princess Diana, the most famous person on earth, estranged from the Prince of Wales, beloved by hundreds of millions of people worldwide, is killed in a car crash in Paris. The public outpouring of grief is overwhelming and unprecedented. Sea of flowers in front of Kensington Palace, millions weeping in the streets. An emotional temperature that frightens anyone who remembers how crowds in grief can turn to crowds in anger. The Queen remains at Balmoral with the young princes, William and Harry. She does not return to London. She does not make a public statement. For 5 days, the flag over Buckingham Palace, which flies at full mast because there is no royal standard present, since the Queen is not in residence, remains up. The public, raw with grief and desperate for acknowledgement from the institution that Diana had ultimately been part of, is furious. The tabloid press turns. Where is our Queen? Where is her flag? It is the most serious threat to the popularity of the monarchy since the abdication. And then, in a decision that represents a very quiet but very real bending of the Queen toward public feeling, the flag is lowered. The Queen returns to London. She makes a live television broadcast, speaking not as Queen but as your Queen and as a grandmother. She speaks of Diana's unique qualities. She speaks of the importance of allowing grief its proper expression. She is not completely natural, the formality is still there, the distance is still there, but she is trying visibly to meet her people where they are. The crisis passes. The monarchy survives. The Queen has shown, perhaps more clearly than at any other point in her reign, that she can adapt. Not cheerfully, not easily, but she can. The 2012 Olympics, the Bond sketch. For sheer public delight. Nothing in Elizabeth's 7-decade reign quite matches the moment at the opening ceremony of the 2012 London Olympics, when the world watches James Bond, played by Daniel Craig, arrive at Buckingham Palace to escort the Queen to the stadium. The Queen, played by the actual Queen, walks with Bond, her corgi dogs following behind. They board a helicopter. They appear to parachute into the stadium. The crowd of 80,000 at the Olympic Stadium erupts. The watching world erupts. This is the other Elizabeth, the Elizabeth who, behind the perfect composure and constitutional discretion, has always had an absolutely dry, perfectly timed, completely deadpan sense of humor. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to do it. She was delighted by it. June 2, 2022, Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. No British monarch in history has reigned longer. The Queen, 96 years old, increasingly frail, using a walking stick, appearing publicly less frequently, appears on the balcony of Buckingham Palace to the roar of the crowd. She is still there. She is still Queen. She has never stopped. September 8, 2022, Balmoral Castle. Queen Elizabeth II, 96 years old, dies peacefully at her beloved Highland home. She had appointed her 15th and final Prime Minister, Liz Truss, 2 days before. She is in her chair in her tartan skirt, looking at her hills. Her last official photographs show her smiling, completely herself, welcoming a new Prime Minister. She never stopped. Chapter 11. The Legacy. What they leave behind. History will argue about Winston Churchill and Queen Elizabeth II separately and together for as long as there is a Briton to argue. Churchill's legacy is enormous and genuinely complicated. He saved Western democracy. There is no other way to say it. In May 1940, when the British War Cabinet debated whether to seek terms with Hitler, and the argument was made by serious, intelligent men that negotiation was preferable to continued war, Churchill refused. His refusal kept Britain fighting. Britain's continued resistance gave Roosevelt the time and the political cover to bring America into the war. Without Churchill's refusal in that cabinet room in May 1940, Western civilization, as we know it, does not survive. This is not hyperbole. This is the sober consensus of military and political historians. But Churchill was also the architect of imperial policies of extraordinary cruelty in India, where his decisions during the 1943 Bengal famine contributed to the deaths of millions. In Kenya, where the British suppression of the Mau uprising involved systematic torture, in multiple colonial theaters across the empire. He held racial views that were, even by the standards of his time, extreme. He was simultaneously the man who saved liberal democracy and the man who did terrible things in the name of empire. Both of these things are true. They cannot be reconciled. They can only be held together. Elizabeth's legacy is quieter, more durable in its way. She presided over the transformation of the British Empire into the Commonwealth. She maintained the relevance and popularity of an institution, the monarchy, that every rational analysis in 1952 would have predicted would become obsolete within a generation. She served 15 prime ministers, witnessed 19 American presidents, outlasted the Soviet Union, the Cold War, and the entire 20th century's geopolitical order. She held the line of constitutional monarchy, the idea that a head of state can stand above politics, can be a point of national unity that transcends party, through 7 decades of extraordinary political turbulence. And she did it through the simplest, most radical act available to a human being in a position of power. She kept her word. At 21, she promised her whole life to service. She kept that promise. Every day, for 75 years. Together, Churchill and Elizabeth represent something specific and irreplaceable about the British 20th century. The idea that character, duty, courage, perseverance, the willingness to serve something larger than yourself, is not merely a private virtue, but a public force. That institutions survive because individuals choose to sustain them. That history is made not only by events, but by the people who refuse to let events overwhelm them. The lion roared. The crown endured. And between them, in those Tuesday afternoon audiences punctuated by peals of laughter, something was passed from one generation to another, a kind of flame, burning from the Victorian age to the 21st century, that Britain still, sometimes, recognizes as its own best self. Outro: if this story moved you, if you saw something in Churchill or Elizabeth, or the extraordinary bond between them that you hadn't seen before, hit that like button. If you're new here, we cover every world leader, every royal, every turning point in modern history. Subscribe so you never miss one. And in the comments, I want your debate. Who was the greater figure, Churchill, the man who saved the world, or Elizabeth, the woman who served it for 70 years without ever cracking? Was their bond the last true expression of the British Empire's ideal of itself? Was Elizabeth right to call Churchill irreplaceable? Or did that just mean no one else made her laugh as hard? Leave your answer below. See you in the next one.